You use the word community, and I have explained on my show many times that sometimes I don't like that word because it's used in the context of government community, political community, and I believe part of the reason we're becoming a totalitarianism is, number one, the hedonism, the search for pleasure, the search for instant gratification. It's going to destroy this country, because that's the first thing. If you don't have your pains, you don't know how good pleasures can be.
Well said.
And when you're nothing but diluted with pleasures, the endorphins don't work the way they used to work.
Right.
You get numb to it, and then it's further seeking down the road where things turn into hedonistic activity. It's horrible the way this country is going, and I think we can see it with the trans movement, the gay movement, just the drugs, like I said. And community is also being driven out. When I talk about community, I think of the churches. I think of the charities.
What I think of. Yeah.
Okay, all right, but that's not
always...
Or
your own city, or your own county. That's what I mean when I say
But they're destroying that.
Yes, they are.
In place of government, God, community.
Agree.
And we lose those little communities. We're going to get one big community that's one size fit all. And believe me, not all of us are going to fit.
And the reason they're attacking that is because that's where your power is.
Yeah.
Your power is in the local school board. Your power is in the local city council, and county council.
Yes.
And so if you basically make those all state controlled, then guess what? You've lost your power.
You lost your power.
You have no power at the Capitol in the state of Oregon. Your power is at your local school board. That's where your power is. So that's why, and that's the argument I make with our elections. The states now, in every state, 50 out of 50, they've centralized the elections. They're centrally controlled. The county clerks don't even know what's going on in their roles. And, we were just talking about it before the interview about here in Coos County, how the county official thinks he's in control of his elections. He doesn't even know that they're connected.
Right.
Okay. So that's the problem. They've so divorced themselves from actually running them locally in their own community. Sorry for the word, but in their own local vicinity.
Right.
You need to, when I was a boy, on election day, my mom would take me by the hand. We walked down a couple of blocks and there'd be a garage.
Yep.
And everybody in that community showed up and voted, and everybody knew everybody.
Yep.
And they turned that tally in, and you could go double check and make sure that was the right tally was turned in, and you could see all the numbers, and you can. But guess what? Even the people running the polls today don't know the tallies, and they don't know. There's no way for them to check them throughout the system. So there's like no auditability internally.
Internally, so you can fix those numbers at the end of the
anywhere. There's like a dozen places to fix the numbers.
Yep.
And nobody has a way to catch that. It's like I love all these. I meet these old ladies. Dr. Frank, don't you tell me there's anything wrong with my election. I sat there all day long and I got everybody's photo ID and I made sure everybody's real. And I counted up the ballots at the end and I made sure it all was right.
Yeah.
And then I say, well, then what'd you do at the end of the day? Oh, I turned in the numbers. And then I went home to watch the election. And I say, well, did you ever call the county and make sure that the numbers that they put in for you were the right ones? And they look at me with these blank looks in their face. And I'm like, I'm sure what you did in person was splendid.
Right.
Okay. But then you turned it away and then you walked away. And most of the time they'll say to me, well, I don't even know how to check that. And I say, well, let's go check. And we'll go check and it doesn't match. And they're like, wait a minute, how come it doesn't match? Well, because what you did in person gets convoluted with the mail-in and military ballots and early voting. And so there's no way for you to even know if your numbers were entered properly.
Right. So
they've sort of taken away all the internal checks, all the internal cross checks that people working in the system would be able to make sure everything was good. So they've basically taken it away from us.
Well, it's really gotten worse here in Coos County because a previous clerk, Keller was her last name. She got rid of the county's election board. Just blanket decision. We're going to get rid of it because no one's interested. 2020 comes along. And it was apathy. And I knew that there were people who just didn't care.
You're totally on. Yeah.
After 2020, you could have filled that room with people who wanted to volunteer.
Yes.
And now it's like, well, we don't want an election board because they review the election. And that's why would you have a problem with that if there's no, it's like the camera she wanted to put up, she wanted to put up the camera behind the computer as the person who's entering the number is facing the camera and facing the computer.
So you can't see what they're putting into the computer.
So you can't see what they're putting into the computer.
It's like the signature. It's like people say, well, I'm going to be a watcher and I'm going to check how they're checking in the ballots. And so you have to sit all the way across the room and you can't even see the postmarks. You can't see you can't see what they're doing. What are you going to do? Just sit there all day long in your hands.
Right.
I would be apathetic about that. I wouldn't want to do that either.
Yeah, well, who cares at this point? It don't matter.
You're not really making any difference.
And that's the great worry here is that because people feel like there's nothing left they can do.
Right.
They're going to get apathetic, and there is stuff you can do. There's always stuff you can do. What would you tell people to do if they?
That's why I'm here this trip. I'm supposed to be meeting with the team tonight. Great. I call it the 7 steps. And when I started this work 4 years ago, I thought I was going to fix the system from the top down. I was meeting with AGs, legislators. I would show them their evidence. I would hack into their elections, and I was assuming that these were people who, if you gave them the evidence, they'd say, oh, no, we have a problem, and they would fix it.
Right.
And nothing happened, top down.
Right.
Okay, so forgive me, but it took me a year, but I learned it. Okay, so I graduated in 2022. I started learning grassroots work, and I started reading Alinsky's Rules for Radicals and Beautiful Trouble and all these revolution books. And I realized this is how they've taken over our country from the bottom up.
Yep.
Well, we have to have bottom-up techniques back. We're not going to be able to fight top-down.
Right.
I like reading. I just finished reading The Art of War for my 3rd time in the last year by Sun Tzu. There's so many principles of war that we need to be using and thinking in our mind right now. So what I do is I've learned and I've developed this thing. I call it the 7 steps for taking back our elections. And when I first wrote it 2 years ago, what I did is I stepped back because I'd been traveling the whole country. And that's working, and that's working, and that's working, and that's working. So what's in common? And I kind of organized it into 7 steps. And then a year later, I was reading it with more mature, more wise eyes after.
Right.
And I realized all I was really doing was teaching people how to be the government again.
Right.
When people are being the government, guess what? It puts them back in control of their elections. So that was my own education. And that's basically what I'm doing. But the essential principle, the essential key strategic element of the 7 steps is that you don't have to comply with any law or policy that disenfranchises you from your constitutional rights. Therefore, show that the system you're using is compromising your constitutional rights. Bring that to your county leaders and say, and you're not going to them and saying, oh, pretty please, we don't like this system anymore. We get rid of it. You're going to your county leaders and saying, you work for us. We're the government. This system is disenfranchising us from our constitutional rights. You're legally responsible for this. We're going to hold you legally responsible for every case of fraud that happens in our county. And they always balk. Oh, don't blame us. It's the state system that's causing this. And by the way, we're not just coming at them and screaming and bloody murder. We're bringing them actual hard evidence of actual fraud. And that's a whole part of the process too. A lot of people think there's fraud when there's not, but we find real fraud. So you bring that and we say, we're going to hold you legally accountable for this. So my goal is to build a community of awareness and a community movement. And Kush, you should probably have 200 or 300 people, okay? And that would be sufficient for this job. And then with the evidence. And then they show up regularly at the county commissioner meetings, constantly bringing new evidence of actual fraud. Take out a newspaper ad and put it in the newspaper. Publish it on social media. There's actual real fraud. And every one of these cases of fraud is disenfranchising one of your citizens from their constitutional rights. And we're holding him and file civil rights violations. There's a whole division of the Federal Justice Department for this. I mean, you're going to make their lives hell. The commissioners, we're trying to just put them between a rock and a hard place.
Right.
They either kowtow to the state or they listen to their citizens.
Which is their job.
Yes.
The second is their job. The first is not. That's the problem.
Exactly. And so, and like in Shasta County, Northern California, how did we win? They had 5 commissioners there. And we had 2 that were on our side willing to defend the citizens and 3 that were not. So we launched a First Amendment war against the 3. We started marching around the building, picketing them at their homes. We launched a boycott against one of their business. We got 2 of the 3 opponents to quit actually quit.
Wow.
And then they held a special election, and we were able to replace one of them. So then we had the 3-2 majority, and then we started doing stuff in Shasta County. Now the state, I mean, this is a war, and no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. So the states actually supported. Can you believe this? The state of California sponsored a recall for the third commissioner, and they had a recall.
That was legal?
Yes. Well, you're asking if they're the ones who make the rules, so they.
Oh, that's true.
Okay.
I forget.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So they actually paid for a recall election against this guy, and he survived by 95 ballots. Okay.
Wow.
And so, but then the state said, we're going to pay $400,000 for a recount by hand of the paper ballots. And he still survived, but it was like only 45 ballots at that point. But this is the state trying to keep the control. So it's a real war. But that's an example of the community
but the
stepping
state
up.
paid for a hand
Yes.
count, read ballot, but
Yeah.
denies it to anyone who asked for that
Yes.
in the 1st
Isn't
place.
that interesting?
And isn't that interesting?
Yes. Huntington,
hold on.
just March of this year,
Yeah.
Huntington Beach, California, 400,000 voters in that city. They announced, the city commissioners announced, starting in 2026, they're running all their own elections. They're requiring photo ID and signature. They added 120 precincts. It's all local, one day. Wow. The state is saying, you can't do that. And they're saying, yes, we can. You know why we can? Because it says right here in our city charter that the state of California signed off on that we can run our own elections. So we are. Now, that's it's the second step in my 7 steps is you form a team, and one of the people on that team, think of it like a war council, right? You don't have all snipers. You have a general and logistics.
Right.
One of them is a researcher, and one of their jobs is to download and read their own laws. We've been out of this loop for so long, we don't even know our own laws.
Right.
So they sat down and read their own laws, and it says, well, we can run our own elections right here at our own charter. Now, when they did that, now there are a whole bunch of cities throughout California that are rewriting their charters because they want to join in. They want to take back local control. So the 7 steps is basically guiding people through a process of restoring their own local control. And what I've learned is once that happens, then guess what? The people go, if we can fix our election, we can also fix our schools, and we can also fix our garbage.
Right.
And they start acting like the government.